have a confession. Netflix has ruined TV for me. Netflix has ruined TV for me because now I know the joy of watching TV shows without commercials. No longer do I have to suffer through car and couch salespeople yelling at me to act now before I miss a once-in-a-lifetime sale that seems to happen about 5 times a year. No longer do I have to cringe as cheerful drug commercials list all the delightful side effects their helpful product might cause. No, I am living a luxuriously commercial-free life, for the most part. Unfortunately, I still run into commercials from time to time, but luckily some of those commercials are pretty good. One of my favorite commercial series in the last few years is from Progressive Insurance, and no, they are not sponsoring this sermon. In this series of commercials, Dr. Rick helps young homeowners avoid turning into their parents. He takes them into places like a hardware store, where he helps them overcome cringy behaviors like talking on their speakerphones in public, giving unsolicited product recommendations to fellow customers, not commenting on a shopper with blue hair, and not helping a random stranger back their minivan out of a parking spot. I laughed so hard the first time I saw these commercials, and then I cringed because while I am not a homeowner, I related to that moment when you realize you are turning into your parents. Now, I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm about to do something I know everyone hates. I'm going to explain the joke in these commercials and why it works. These commercials work because they play off common stereotypes we have of middle-aged parents and the fears that young people have of becoming like their parents as they age, becoming uncool and doing or saying things they swore they'd never do or say. The advertisers use stereotypes to take a lighthearted jab at the very real fears of aging and becoming uncool or out of touch that are pervasive in American culture. While stereotypes can make us laugh and help us see ourselves more clearly, stereotypes can also cause a great deal of harm. Today, we continue our Lent series, The Gospel of the Nobodies. Throughout this series, we've heard stories from the Gospel of Luke that highlight people on the fringes of society and the way Jesus interacted with them. We've been learning that the people society casts aside are the people who have the most to teach us about what it means to live and love like Jesus. Our story today comes from Luke chapter 7. Jesus is in Galilee and is gaining a reputation for his preaching and healing. People are curious about who he is and what he's doing. One day, a Jewish religious leader named Simon invites Jesus to share a meal in his home. When we think of eating in someone's home, we think of a private, intimate gathering. But in Jesus' day, it was not uncommon for a private dinner to be a public event. People gathered in the courtyard of Simon's home, hoping to catch a glimpse of Simon and his guests. Who were the people special enough to be invited into a Pharisee's home? Jesus and the other guests recline around the table, eating and talking, and then something unusual happens. A woman enters the room weeping. The room goes silent, all eyes on this uninvited guest as she makes her way to where Jesus is reclining and kneels at his feet. She begins to wash Jesus' feet with her tears and dries them with her hair. As she kisses his feet, she takes out an alabaster jar and anoints his feet with the precious and expensive ointment inside. Simon and his guests watch, horrified that Jesus is allowing this display. Doesn't Jesus know who this woman is? Simon thinks to himself that if Jesus really was a prophet, he would know what kind of a woman is touching him. A sinner. How can he let this woman touch him and make him as unclean as she is? As Simon stews in his thoughts, Jesus speaks up. Simon, he says, I have something to say to you. At dinner parties like this, it was common for guests and hosts to pose riddles to one another as a contest of wit. Not one to back down from a challenge, Simon asks Jesus to speak. A certain creditor had 2 people who owed him money, Jesus begins. One of the people owed 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither could pay off their debt, so the creditor canceled both of their debts. Which of the two will love him more? Simon answers without hesitation, the one who had the greater debt canceled will love him more. Jesus affirms that Simon has answered correctly, and then he motions to the woman at his feet and says, Simon, do you see this woman? When I entered your house, you did not wash my feet or kiss my cheek. You did not anoint my head with oil. You failed to show proper hospitality, but this woman has done all that and more. She is someone who has experienced great forgiveness, and now she shows great love. Then he turns to the woman and tells her she is forgiven. Simon is speechless, but his guests murmur to each other around the table. Who does this man think he is? Unbothered, Jesus turns to the woman and tells her to go in peace. Do you see this woman? With one simple question, Jesus challenges the worldview of everyone in the room. Do you see this woman? When Simon and his guests look at the woman, all they see is a sinner. She has no name. She is just a sinner. She is defined by what she has done, whatever it is that makes her unclean and unacceptable in society's eyes. When Jesus looks at the woman, he sees someone who has sorrows and joys, capacity for bad and good, someone with a full life who acted out of love and gratitude and hospitality, someone whose perceived sins did not define her. Jesus did not see a label. Jesus saw a person. And he asks Simon and the others to look past the label and reputation they've applied to the woman and really see her in all her glorious humanity. When they do, they see how this person they consider unclean outdid them in their righteousness. Where they failed to show hospitality, even though they knew all the right things to do, she showed it tenfold, even though she knew people would not expect it of someone like her. When they really looked at her, they saw her subverting the stereotypes they had of people like her. Stereotypes are dangerous in that way. They obscure the humanity of the people we apply them to and keep us from truly seeing the whole person in front of us. If we want to love people the way Jesus loves them, we must move beyond stereotypes we have of people who are different from us. So where do we begin? We begin by understanding what a stereotype actually is and how it can cause harm. A stereotype is an oversimplified and widely held belief or idea about a particular group of people or person that is untrue or only partially true. For example, homeless people are alcoholics and drug addicts. Poor people are lazy. LGBTQ people are predators. Northerners are rude and Southerners are stupid. Women with children are less devoted to their jobs, and men who spend time with their family are less masculine. All Asians are good at math, and all Muslims are terrorists. I'm sure you've probably heard these stereotypes and many others not on that list. As I mentioned before, stereotypes like these are dangerous because they cause us to see people who are different than us as less than fully human. And when we dehumanize people, it is easier to marginalize and oppress them, excusing ourselves from helping them because we don't actually see them as human beings worthy of care. Stereotypes start as an idea, and if we're not careful, they can turn into prejudice that leads to discrimination. I like this description from the Malaysian Mental Health Association that shows how stereotypes can turn into discrimination. It all starts with a stereotype. For example, people with pink hair are mean. That stereotype creates a feeling or a prejudice. I don't like people with pink hair. That prejudice leads to an action or discrimination. I'm not going to let anyone with pink hair sit next to me at lunch. This is a silly example, but you can see why we need to take stereotypes so seriously, especially if we're serious about our belief as Christians that all people are created by God and have inherent value and worth. Our thoughts motivate our actions, even when we don't realize they are doing so. Jesus took dismantling the stereotypes of his day seriously. The people we're talking about in this series were considered nobodies and outcasts because of the stereotypes people had of them. Stereotypes that allowed others to dehumanize them and see them as less valuable. Jesus consistently interacted with these so-called nobodies and showed everyone that they were more than the stereotypes people used to justify discriminating against them. Jesus went out of his way to make it clear that everyone is worthy of love and dignity. Those of us who claim to follow Jesus have a responsibility to do the same. We must dismantle stereotypes and see people for who they really are. We can never hope to achieve anything that looks remotely like a just, equitable, and peaceful world until we do so. So how do we start to dismantle stereotypes? It would be easy for me to say, just stop stereotyping people and leave it at that. But I like the language of dismantling stereotypes better. That's because our brains are wired to stereotype people. From an early age, we learn to categorize people in our minds to help us navigate the world around us. We create mental shortcuts, which psychologists call heuristics. It's how our brains create some sense of order out of chaos, especially in unfamiliar situations. Recognizing that we naturally latch on to categories and stereotypes is not cause for despair or futility. It's cause for hope, because if we understand our impulse to stereotype people, we can become self-aware enough to question the labels we put on them. We can take intentional action. Researchers at the University of California at Berkeley found that a crucial skill for dismantling stereotypes and building bridges between different kinds of people is to focus on individual characteristics rather than group identity. In other words, when you find yourself making assumptions about a person because of their race, gender identity, sexual orientation, or anything else, focus instead on getting to know the person in front of you for who they are. Don't let whatever you've heard about people like them keep you from truly seeing the person in front of you. Another important action we can take is to avoid generalizations. Recognize that what is true about one person is not necessarily true about every person who looks or lives like them. Finally, be willing to speak up when you recognize that someone is using a harmful and untrue stereotype to describe someone else or justify their feelings or actions against that person. There are ways to do this that lead to productive dialogue and change. But understanding that a stereotype is not true is pointless if we do nothing when we notice it being used as a weapon. This is hard work. Dismantling stereotypes is a lifelong process because so many stereotypes run deeply in our culture. But just because it's difficult and ongoing doesn't mean it isn't worth doing. When we look beyond the stereotypes we have of people, we get to actually know them for who they are. We get to have relationships that are rich and meaningful. We can create a culture where all people are allowed to thrive as who they are. We get to see a glimpse of God's shalom, a peace that runs deep and has the power to change the world. Amen.